everyone. Welcome to Groundwater Talk Live. I am Tom Ballard, the Groundwater Guy, and today we're going to be talking about a well location study in San Diego County, California, using fracture trace and liniment assessment techniques. And so that's going to be our topic today. We'll kind of walk through how we did this study and what we came up with. It's still a little bit in progress. They haven't drilled the well yet, but I think it's an interesting study nevertheless, and we want to look at that. But before we get going, I want to ask everybody to like, comment, and share. It helps us get the word out there for our small but growing channel. So I appreciate any of the stuff. I do respond to all comments and appreciate all of those. So thank you. All right. So today we're talking about a well location study we did at Lake Hodges, which is located south of Escondido, California. This was done for the city of San Diego. They have a recreation facility there at the lake. It has an existing well that is really not a very good producer. So they're looking at replacing that well and maybe redeveloping the existing well so they have additional facilities. But there are some additional wrinkles here because in this part of California, in San Diego County area, they do look at the fact that any well that is located within 500 feet of a surface water body, and this includes ephemeral streams as well, not just perennial streams or lakes, but also ephemeral streams, that well is considered to be groundwater under the direct influence of surface water and needs to be managed accordingly with all the testing and everything that goes with that. It's kind of it's not really based on geology, it's based on geographic proximity to these features. So we try to locate wells as much as possible. I mean, obviously the geology is what rules in the long run, but as much as possible, we try to locate wells outside of that 500-foot radius. It can be challenging at times because we're talking ephemeral streams, and how do you define that? But generally we've been pretty good at doing that. But that is an additional wrinkle that you got to look at when you're locating wells in this part of the country. So, all right, so let's dive in here. First off, we have. Let me show you where we're at on Google Earth here. So let's dive in here. And we can see where we're at. This is Lake Hodges here. This is our location. This is the recreation facility here, and you can see the boat ramp. The water is kind of low when this picture was taken. The existing well is here, and basically we came up with a couple locations here, and I'll go through how we located those and prioritized those. That's going to be what we're going to be talking about today. But I just wanted you to see basically where we're at here and go from there. So let me close out of there and go to then our study. So this is an aerial photograph of the area. So we started off with, we looked at several different techniques here, and the first place we looked is aerial photography. So once again, you can see here, this is the existing well is here. This is the recreational facility parking lot, boat ramps, and that whole deal here. So this is kind of what we're looking at in terms of aerial photography. You can see some community here. This is the lake itself. It kind of fluctuates up and down. We saw in the Google Earth imagery, it was pretty low at that point. This is a little higher. So let's look at the LiDAR as well. This is the LiDAR actually, and it is actually right around the lake. So you can see some of the aerial photography poking through because there's not LiDAR coverage all the way out there. But since we're mainly interested in this area here, you can see basically where the parking lot is, and the boat ramp is down here, the existing well. This is a little hill here, and there's some other hills here. we were looking at some long linear traces through here and some smaller ones through here that were being picked up. And I find that LiDAR is an incredibly useful tool. There's a lot of things you can do with it, a lot of ways you can manipulate it to really look at some of these linear trends. So when we're doing fracture trace and liniment assessment, it is a valuable tool to try to figure some of these things out. Now you can see we have, I believe this is a power line here. You can see some linear features on here that are clearly man-made. Some of these are roads, and you can see some other roads and structures and things in here. So you got to kind of filter that stuff out. We didn't do that on this one. There are some ways to actually go in there and filter out the buildings and do some additional manipulation. We didn't do that here because there really wasn't a lot of development in our area of interest, and so we didn't need to do that additional filtering. So we just took the data we had. And if you were working in some of these other areas here, you may want to do that and do that additional filtering to only look at the LiDAR data that reflects the ground itself, so you can discover these structures. So that is the LiDAR data. Now you can also do some this is some hill slope shading. That's one way to look at it, so you can get some idea of the different elevations and get some idea there. So there's some different ways of manipulating this. We did some basic stuff here. This is actually color relief. You can see it's a little more fuzzy, but sometimes you can actually pick up. This is a way to look at it where you're not being drawn to particular features and getting distracted by things. You can start to pick up some trends when you do this. So that's just one of the tools in our toolboxes. We look at all these things and really go through here. Sometimes we'll build digital terrain models from the LiDAR data where you can rotate it in 3D. We really didn't have to do that in this case, but there are a whole range of possibilities here. And then lastly, let's look at the topo map here. I put some linears on here. You can see this big long one that we had. That's a significant one, and then some of these cross fracture trends that we identified as well, and that was kind of the basis for picking our well location. So you can see what we did here. Once again, the parking lot is here, the boat ramp is down here, so we're dealing with the same area here. All right, so let's go back and let's look at our figures here. Well, let's actually do this. Let's look at the a little bit of the background on the area. So how we actually did our study. We start off with looking at the regional hydrogeology, and so we do a little bit of a study there. This illustration here is actually from the Department of Water Resources. They have a number of monitoring wells in the different areas. In this particular case, let me just blow this up a bit. You can see these dots here are actually monitoring wells where they collect sometimes water quality data, mainly groundwater levels. Really nothing in our particular area, but we always go there first to see if there's any interesting data that we can look at. So we that's part of our look-see when we're gathering data here. So we go through the geology, and the geology in this area is mainly intrusive rocks. There's going to be some granodiorites, there's some gabbros, there's some tonalites, so a lot of different intrusive rocks. There are some metamorphic rocks in the area, kind of out of our area of interest. So mainly what we're dealing with is intrusive rocks. And when you're dealing with intrusive rocks, then what you're really looking at is the fractures are going to be your aquifer. So we got to pay attention to the fracture zones. So this was really a fracture trace and liniment assessment study. So we kind of dive into that there. And just as a reminder, a fracture trace is a natural linear feature less than a mile long, best seen on aerial photographs. So LiDAR works well there. A liniment is a fracture trace or series of fracture traces that extends for more than a mile. So we actually have a liniment in here along the topography there, and then we have some smaller fracture trace. We're generally trying to look for intersections, a major fracture trace or liniment with some intersecting smaller fractures, and that's generally going to break the rock up the most, and that's where you're going to get your best results for drilling wells in fractured bedrock. So fairly simple explanation, but we go through that here, and here's kind of a famous illustration of that. You know, where what we're really looking for is those fracture zones. In this case, we don't really have any bedding plane fractures, so we're really looking at vertical or near vertical fracture zones. And obviously, here is an illustration of the best place to put a well. You want where there's a lot of fracturing going on, and that's where you're going to get your best basically aquifer development. Your aquifer is going to be the broken rock zones in the fractures, and that is where aquifer is. So well A obviously is better than well B in this situation. So the other thing we do is we go to the state of California well database, and you can see here our study areas in the red here in the middle. We looked at the sections around that. The yellow shows where we have, there are existing wells in there where the logs are available. Part of our area here has no wells. So, and most of the wells in these sections are kind of outside our area of interest. So, but it can be instructive looking at these things. So, and I'll show you what the well logs look like here in a minute. But here's a summary of the local well data. You can see the well depths actually vary all over the place from 92 feet to 1,610 feet. Does not seem to be a really good correlation between depth and productivity in the wells. So really nothing to go on there. And it really comes down to is, as we know, where you are in these fracture zones. And my guess is these really dry wells and stuff were not on a good fracture zone, and that's why you're not getting any yields here. So, but we go through this exercise and look at this, and that helps us prioritize things. I'll show you the sampling of the well logs we looked at. You can see that most of the production is coming from fractures in some of these better producing wells. So this is looking at well yield versus depth. You can see kind of the sweet spot, as it were, would be 510 feet here. But it kind of varies all over the board. This particular well here is actually the well there at the recreation facility at Lake Hodges. These are some deeper wells. 510 feet, really when you get to fracture zones, in general, when you get below 400 or 500 feet, the fractures start to squeeze shut for the most part. So you're going to get a little bit better productivity in a fracture-based well between 400 or 500 feet, really not getting down below 500 feet or so. Now, clearly, you're getting some down here, so these are bigger fracture zones, obviously, or more fracture zones. So there are exceptions to every rule, but generally, if you're looking at smaller fracture zones, they're going to start to squeeze shut below 400 feet or so. And so we really try to, fractured bedrock wells, we really try to look at generally no deeper than 500 feet or so in these. Now, obviously, if you're still getting fractures, you can go deeper and increase your production. But if you're just dealing with fractures here and there, generally that's not going to be real productive to go really deep here. So, and you can see the deepest well out here was basically a dry well. So that's some of the other exercise we go through. We looked at well depth, potential yields in these wells, and we saw a range here. If you go back here, we can see this well at 510 feet was 20 gallons per minute. Some of these a little shallower were, about 15 gallons a minute or so, and even this 1,200 foot one was down around 10 gallons a minute. So you can see there's there is some potential out there to have a decent well, not a huge well. Most fractured bedrock wells are not going to be the producers you'll get in alluvium. So the other thing we looked at was well yield sustainability. You got to have some pumping test data really to look at this, and that's not always available. There'll be some pumping test data on the well logs, but generally that's going to be 8-hour pump tests, and it's not terribly useful. In California for production wells, they make you look at either a 72-hour test or a 10-day test, so to determine the sustainability of that well, and you're generally not going to get that on the well log. Um, so that's one thing we looked at. We also looked at, because you're in this part of the world, we looked at oil geology, but because we're in intrusive rocks, that really wasn't a big consideration. Groundwater quality, um, there wasn't a lot of data here. We did look at the water quality in the existing well at the Lake Hodges facility. That has intermittently tested positive for coliform. Coliform is generally going to be a surface water intrusion issue. And in this case, we know we have a poor annual seal. And then we have ground squirrels burrowing underneath the well pedestal. That's going to allow infiltration of surface water in there. So that if they recondition this well and redevelop it, they're probably going to have to deal with some of those issues and fix those problems so they can get rid of their coliform problem. So drilling considerations, we look at the well logs for that to see if there's any difficulty in drilling and the drilling methods they use. So that's the background we use, and like I say, we're using, in this case, we're using all the available data, and then we're also looking at aerial photography, LiDAR data, and topography data as well. So now we get into the potential well sites, and this is our report here. We came up with 2 priorities, and I will show you those just here in a little bit. I usually identify those. We'll identify those using our desktop techniques, and then we go out and field verify the fracture locations in the field, and that's what we did in this case. So we did all the office work and looked at the LiDAR and the aerial photography and the topo maps and the other data that was available. We came up with our priority location, and then we go out and kind of ground truth those in the field and tweak those a little bit, and then stake them out for future drilling. So we had priority 1, priority 2. Priority 1 was actually outside the GWUDI 500-foot buffer zone. So this is good. Lies on a nice long linament with some cross fractures. So we felt this was an excellent location. We did come up with a priority 2 here. That is going to fall within the GWUDI boundary, and so it's a less preferable location. The thing it does have going for it is it looks like it's probably they're going to hit some water there, but it is also closer to the facility. So there are some positive things there, but in general, avoiding the GWUDI, being within the GWUDI buffer zone is probably better for long-term costs, and so that's really how we prioritize things. And then we locate things by latitude and longitude, confirm that on the ground. So then we have our conclusions and our recommendations, basically drilling recommendations and that type of thing, and our reference here. So let's go to the figures here. And this is our site map, and once again our boundaries. This is not the entire facility here. The Lake Hodges facility wraps all the way around the lake. This was what we felt was our study area boundary, where we go in and we actually look at this is within the realm of possibility of where we'd want to find wells where you could actually develop the infrastructure to go to the Lake Hodges recreation facility, and it wouldn't be outside the realm of possibility. And we also wanted to make it wide enough so we could get outside that GWUDI buffer. So what we have here then is the blue lines are basically surface water and stream channels, and the purple here is the reservoir boundaries, and then the kind of grayish green here is actually the 500-foot GWUDI buffer area. So you can see kind of how we lie. We didn't have a real big area that we looked at here that was outside the the GWUDI area, but we did find this, our well priority 1 was there, well priority 2 was not. And so let's dive in a little bit more on that. So this figure is going to show you the geology, and you can see that we have and here's the existing wells in the area. We'll look at the well logs here in a little bit. They're all outside the Lake Hodges recreation area boundary. But you can see we have some alluvium through here, and there's this basically this low-lying ridge between this, I believe this is a gabbro here, this is a tonalite here, we have some granodiorite over here, and then there are some metamorphic rocks that are off the map to the south here. So this low area really constitutes a long lineament here, and we'll see that in a little bit here. We looked at wells within basically a 0.7 mile radius, 0.75 mile radius, and so that's what these wells are here. They're numbered. I'll show you the logs here in a little bit. And once again, our priority well locations here. So you can see the background on the geology, not what you'd normally think of when you're looking for productive wells. So the fractures are the key in this type of environment. All right, so let's look at our linears here, and this is the base here is the LiDAR. You can see once again, I believe this is either a fence line or a power line. I'd have to go back and look at that. We do have a stream here. This is the lakeshore boundary. In the red here is our study area, and what I have here in the dark blue is actually our linears. This one that's trending to the northeast, that is a long linear that's multiple miles long and actually separates the gabbro over here from the tonalite over here. And then we're also looking at these cross fracture zones. So you can see we got a couple cross fractures coming into this main fracture. That is why we prioritize this location. We actually did fairly well in the office study because we went out there and we really didn't have to move this location at all. We were pretty much spot on. So that's not always the case when you're using Google Earth. Sometimes they don't georectify their aerial photography all that well, or it changes, and so it can be a little bit iffy. That's why you always want a ground truth, because what you're seeing in the office may not be totally, it may be shifted. There can be some scaling errors. There can be some georeferencing errors, and so you need to check those out on the ground. So priority 1, priority 2. Once again, priority 2. We're seeing an intersection of fractures here. This is within the GWUDI boundary, which is why it's a little bit lower priority. Although I think you would probably get some decent production there. This one looks pretty good as well, and that is outside the GWUDI boundary. So. And that is what is in the tannish zone here. That is land that's outside the GWUDI buffer. So that's what we're looking at here in our proposed well locations. Fairly simple, but there is a lot of background that goes into all this as well. Here's the existing well. You can see they had it really on one fracture, but there's not an intersecting fracture here. So that's why a little bit why it's a lower producer. It's a relatively shallow well. Well, no, around 400 some feet, I think, deep. So not too shallow, but it's not well situated when it comes to the fracture zones that are going to give you your water. So you can see why the production is less than 5 gallons a minute. So. All right, so let's look at the well logs here. If I can get that here. These are the well logs in the area, and the well logs in California vary by age, so they use different forms, so you'll see some of that. But you'll see you have granitic rock here, and you'll see you got some fractures in here, and that's where the water's going to be. Consistent theme as you go down here. Some of these are a little more iffy on how they draw these illustrations up. And there are some maps here. You can see here on this particular one, this is actually a good one where you see they actually did a pretty good job. This driller, who was this driller? Hmm. Oh, Tri-County Drilling. They did a really good job actually in logging this because they're mapping out all the fractures here. And you can see you got a fair number of fractures. They are looking at about 15 gallons a minute with on a 2-hour test with 510 feet of drawdown. So fairly significant amount of drawdown, but you're getting some productive fractures in here. They actually even charted out and you take these with a grain of salt, the gallons per minute and the fracture, but you can see we're getting some steady amounts coming in, not a lot, but it ends up being about a 15 gallon a minute well. My guess is it probably comes out less because that was only based on a 2-hour test. So let's look at some of these other ones. Once again, you can see this one, better producer. The production is all coming out of the fracture zones, and you're in granitic rock once again. So, and you can see common theme going through here. You can see this on all these. The fracture zones are what yield the water here. So we don't need to go through all these, but I just wanted to illustrate the point that where there's a decent well log, it's going to show that the water, you're in granitic rocks and the water is coming out of the fracture zones. So it's really important to understand where these fracture zones are. I believe a lot of these are open hole wells. Some of these, yeah, some of these are they have casing at the top, but these are pretty much all open hole wells because they're in granite and it stands pretty well. So so there you go on that. And once again, going back here, this is how we selected our well locations and looking at basically the potential for substantial fracturing. So we look at this, and if I go back here to my topo map, you can see this linear feature here that runs to the northeast is actually a fairly long lineament. And so you're separating gabbro here from tonalite here. You're basically got truncated hills here. And actually, if I extended this map out, you could see this even extends a little bit farther and you can start to pick it up again to the north. So it's not mapped as a fault, but this is a substantial lineament feature that I believe represents fracturing. So it's interesting when you look at the geologic maps, not all faults are mapped. And that's the important consideration when we go in and do these well studies. We're looking for lineaments, we're looking for fracture traces, and they're not, you can't just go to a geologic map and take the faults and assume that that's everything. We want to look at some of these smaller fracture zones, but we want to look at some of these long linears, and this clearly is not mapped as a fault on here. So, so if we go back to our geologic map, for instance, there is no fault mapped in there. So, but we know there's a big linear feature because it's established by both the topography and the geology. That it's basically separating these intrusive masses. So there you have it. Let's go back here and wrap up. So this is yet to be drilled. So we don't know exactly what we're going to get here, but I'm fairly confident we're going to see some decent results that give them an improvement over their existing less than 5 gallon a minute well. So once they drill this, they should have some decent results. And so I'm interested in seeing this. Maybe we'll do a follow-up on that when that actually happens. So there you have it. That is kind of our process for going through a fracture trace and liniment assessment study, looking for water well locations, and kind of that's kind of a deep dive in how we do it. There may be some other digital tools we bring in as they're available. Sometimes some tools are in government databases are available in certain areas, and some they aren't. Some you can get access to, some you can't. I've teamed up with some academic institutions that can get access to data that I can't as a consultant. So sometimes you got to tap into some of that knowledge as well. But a lot of it is just pulling together the data, and the fracture trace is really a matter of documenting that. Sometimes, like in this case, they're pretty obvious, that big northeastern linear trend, pretty obvious. Sometimes the smaller fracture traces that you look at can be a little more subtle, and so you have to go in there and dump it into your, I use a program called Global Mapper that allows me to take these things, rotate them around, and and look at different hill shading, so you can pick up different features to pick up some of these more subtle fracture zones. And then we start to look for the intersections of those where you're getting the most broken rock. So that in a nutshell is how we do that. You've kind of seen the inside there. So if you got any questions, please post them in the comments. I'm happy to answer them. All right. If you're interested in being a guest on Groundwater Talk Live in the future, this is the Book Me page. I'd love to have qualified groundwater professionals come on, whether you're a pump guy, whether you're another geologist, whether you're an engineer, water system operator, to talk shop in here, and we'd love to have you on. So this is the link to come on the show. And with that,